If nobody has any questions, let's begin. So, as usual, our Tuesday reading is on race, and the book today is... Nope, that is not the image that I wanted. I am so sorry. That's it. Why I am no longer talking to white people about race. Yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the chat, and I will do my best to answer. Thank you so much, Dr. Jason. Thank you, everybody, for being here, everybody who is here. So we stopped on, chapter 1 is histories, and the history of racism and race dynamics in our contemporary society have always been skewed towards whiteness, and I say that very understatedly. Update. House passed with near unanimous. Oof. So I guess the Epstein files are being released. What do you think that means for the future of the US? Hi, B. What do you think that means for the future of the US? Near unanimous. 1 no and 5 non-votes. So, who knows? They may, Louisiana. Of course, Louisiana. And I'm assuming that the people who did vote, who abstained, and the one who voted no, don't want it released for a reason. Either loyalty, fealty, I should say, and maybe because they're in them. So who knows? We shall see. And Dr. J says, I think Trump made a mistake targeting Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's pushing against Trump hard. I feel like they intended to go after him. Exactly. The Senate votes this evening. What time is the Senate vote? Because I do know that our friends will probably be streaming the vote. I'm not in the mood. And the thing is, all of this is tied together. All of these issues are intrinsically linked. Power protecting power. And power protects power for one main reason, and that is profit. Profit over people. Power protects power because it is imperative that the powerful show solidarity together. And that is why we as the proletariat need to be showing solidarity. Need to be in solidarity together, because there's absolutely no fucking way that the ruling classes are actually going to let us get anything without a fight. And we need to continue fighting. Let me just close this window because it is raining. Can you hear the rain? Can those of you on YouTube and Twitch, can you hear the rain? Because it is quite the downpour. And you'll be able to hear my foot heater I am so sorry. I have to have it on. My feet are freezing, and no amount of layering on my feet will actually help. So I got my foot heat on every now and then. Why I'm saying that it is all interlinked is because racism is a tool of capitalism. Racism was used to justify the enslavement and colonization of people, and that was for capital gain. So there's absolutely no way that they were going to release the files of their own accord, because that would diminish their ability to gain capital. Okay, B. And so now on why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. Every time white people fight against us calling out racism, they are saying that, no, I don't benefit from the system, when they absolutely do. And they are maintaining their power. They're trying to, very, very hard, trying to maintain their own power by denying that it exists. Hi, welcome, comrade. They are trying to, very, very hard, cling to whatever power that whiteness gives them. So when they say, no, racism doesn't exist anymore, they're denying the structural power that got them to where they are, and the power that they maintain and hold in society through racist structures. And they want to say, no, we did it by ourselves. We absolutely did it by ourselves. No, you may have built your business from the ground up, but whiteness gave you a hand up. Never, ever, ever pretend that whiteness isn't a handout. Whiteness is abso-fucking-lutely a handout. Remember to tappity-tap the screen, share the live, and share the Twitch and YouTube links to your friends. And this is a downpour. Wow. I love the rain, but I don't like this. So let us begin. Last time we finished on page 38, where she's talking about the race riots across the UK. And this line is quite poignant, actually, to start with. Because history is written by the winners, evidence of police harassment of people of color in the early 1980s is hard to come by. But the new monitoring project bucked that trend. The organization, formed in 1980 after Asian teenager Akhtar Ali Baig was murdered by a gang of white skinheads on his way home from college. Now, I do want to correct her language use here. We know now that skinhead is actually a positive term. The term that she should have been using here is bonehead, which is the people who, yes, that is rain, is rattling the house. The bonehead, boneheads appropriated the skinhead movement, and as they do, turned it into something really, really evil. And we need to reclaim skinheads against racism. The boneheads were the Nazis, and still are. Asian teenager Akhtar Ali Baig was murdered by a gang of white skinheads on his way home from college. The following trial saw a judge comment that the murder was motivated by racial hatred. Frustrated by a lack of implementation of laws against racism, people in the community clubbed together to offer logistical support against racist harassment, and the Newham Monitoring Project was born. The grassroots organization campaigned against racist violence, including violence enacted by the police until 2015, when it was forced to shut down due to the lack of funds. Thank you, Lute. One part of the Newham Monitoring Project's work took place in the form of their annual reports, and their 1983 report gives a glimpse of what it was like to be black in East London at the time. During that year, the project received 26 reports of police harassment. One of those who were harassed by the police and subsequently arrested, 47 were released without charge. Those who were charged by the police were later released. Case studies in the report reveal a portrait of black families under siege. The home of Mr. N and his family have been searched 4 out of 5 times this year alone, the report reads. Each time the police officers have had their warrants with them made out for stolen goods. Each time they found no evidence and therefore have preferred no charges. The family expect their home to be invaded at any time. They live in constant fear of the next visit by the police. There was also a case of 45-year-old Ose Osu, who, after police turned up at his home asking to breathalyze him, refused. Minutes later, while he was in the bathroom in his house, 10 to 12 police officers smashed their way in, breaking down his front door. He was then dragged out, naked, out of the bath, brutally assaulted with truncheons, and then taken to Forest Gate Police Station. Once at the police station, he was breathalyzed. 3 breathalyzer tests on him failed. In one incident, officers targeted a whole family. John Power was walking home after having been to a youth club, the project recorded. As he was walking, a police car drew up alongside him by the pavement. The police officer in the car shouted, "Oi, come here, you black bastard." Whenever people say reform the police, I say fuck no. John carried on walking. Then, fearing something may happen, he started to run home. Police officers followed him home to his house, got to the front door, opened it, and pulled John out, and proceeded to beat him. When his father intervened, the police officers started beating him up as well. When John's sister saw what was happening and screamed in fear, the police officer asked her to shut up and then pushed and hit her. All 3 were then put into different vehicles and taken to East Ham Police Station. They were then charged with obstruction and various charges of assaulting police officers. At the same time of this intense police brutality, there was also a movement towards restoring the eroded trust between people of color and the police. How can you restore trust when there was never trust to begin with? You cannot restore trust when the police and the policing system were built to target people of color. There is absolutely no trust there. So fuck that shit. It's absolute noise. It's not eroded trust. There was just never trust in the first place. Taking the lead from the United States, the police began to enact new strategies. Community policing put officers in touch with people in local areas so residents could get to know them. The late Chief Constable John Alderson strongly argued in the early 80s that police should have a more human involvement with the places they policed. But this kind of community approach did not work to the benefit of black people, obviously. The Monitoring Project's 1983 report highlighted this with a case in which an innocent black schoolboy was detained by the police. 11-year-old Sean Robertson Secondary School had given a police officer who was investigating a robbery the names and addresses of every black child who attended the school. Of course, Of fucking course. Because school structures are complicit in institutionalized racism. When the police officer mentioned that one of the suspects had 2 protruding front teeth, a school staff member let them know that Sean had been to the orthodontist the same day. It was in this way he became a suspect. Camden's Committee for Community Relations described the double nature of the police in their 84 report, writing, "Police strategy is two-faced. The brutality, racism, and denial of civil liberties are meant, in the main, to be hidden from public view. The counter to this is community policing, our neighborhood watch, the Police Community Consultative Committee, community liaison officers, all part of public relations exercises to convince us that the police have a genuine interest in the community's well-being. TLDR, they don't. Oral histories from black people who lived through this time maintain one common thread. The police were not protecting them. The riots of 1981 saw a renewed interest in social cohesion from both authorities and national government. An inquiry commissioned by the government was carried out by Lord Scarman. Oh, wow. Spell Scarman. There's a scar man waiting in the sky. Sorry. To investigate the cause of the Brixton riots. The report was published by the end of that year, recommending that police put more effort into recruiting new officers from ethnic minority backgrounds. However, it concluded that institutional racism was not the problem, instead pinpointing racial disadvantage as an urgent social ill. Of course, we investigated ourselves and found that we did nothing wrong. As a response to the report's recommendations, Hendon Police College set up its first multicultural unit. In 1982, John Fernandez was a black sociology student at the now defunct Kilburn Polytechnic. Being an employee at Brett Council meant that John had some of his fellow lecturers were temporarily moved over to the local police college to teach. The police college thought, oh my god, if Scarman's coming here, we better start doing something to show that we are dealing with the problem. John told me over the phone from his home in the countryside. Hendon Police College wanted John and his colleagues to develop a course about multiculturalism to teach to police cadets in training. Okay, before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a story. Sweden is a fucking racist country. And I lived there for a little while. We lived in a fairly, I should say, liberal city by Swedish standards. Considered one of the most queer-friendly cities in the Nordics. Incredibly safe. No, gang violence to speak of, that kind of stuff. But they had what was called no-go zones. No-go zones were the zones where immigrants lived, brown immigrants. And that is telling. The policing was unequal, very unevenly distributed. Resources were unevenly distributed. And these no-go zones were considered no-go zones for white people. And then there was the university. It's a university, it's a textile town. Let's put it that way. It's considered a city because it has a cathedral. That was the only reason. 100,000 people. It's hardly a city. It's a biggish town by Swedish standards. And mind you, that the entire population of Johannesburg is 10,500. The whole population of Sweden is 10.5 million. And the whole population of Sweden is 10.5 million. So, like, you have... I live in a city with a population the size of Sweden's. The policing was vile toward people of color, even though it's seen as a fairly liberal city in terms of ideologies. The university itself was one of the key markers of the racial inequity in the city. So much so that when the people of color at the university, including myself, developed racial sensitivity training and all of these courses to educate the white folk about the struggles of people of color, they agreed and said, yes, this is a nationwide problem that we need to tackle, just as any good university would. But they reacted in exactly the same way as every other white institution did. And what did they do? The entire committee set up to tackle the problem of race was white. You know, when I say I'm like, I white girl can't even, yeah. The entire committee to tackle the race problem in Borås, Sweden, was white. So that's an aside. Training to be a cadet was an internship-style scheme for young people that often led to full-time jobs for the police force. John was elected by his colleagues to head up Hendon Police College's multicultural unit, but he immediately ran into problems, obviously. The first red flag was that the college wanted to put an emphasis on multiculturalism rather than anti-racism. Of course, because they don't like to acknowledge that race and racism is the problem. Oh, let's brand it as something different. Let's brand it as something nicer. I was not very happy as a black sociologist, he explained. I wanted an anti-racist approach to it. They want to continue being racist. That's the thing. They want to say we're doing all of these things to fix the problem, but they're not actually fixing the problem. They just want to show that maybe they are. The problem is not a black problem. It's not my culture, religion, that is the problem. It is the racism of white institutions, he said. To go about proving that his anti-racist perspective would be more useful, he had to do a bit of research. I was putting up a course as part of my submission on that course that I had to provide evidence, John said. I couldn't just make a statement and say I want to do an anti-racist course instead of a multiculturalism one. He had to demonstrate that there was an already existing racial bias in the college's new recruits. As part of my research, I might have found that none of the cadets had racist bias, maybe just a couple, so it's not a problem, so I'll do the multicultural course. His research saw him ask trainee police cadets at his college to write anonymous essays on the topic of blacks in Britain, and the responses were shocking. Blacks in Britain are pests, read one essay. They come over here from some tin pot banana country where they lived in huts and worked in fields for cultivating rice and bananas, coconuts and tobacco, and take up residence in our already overcrowded island. They are, by nature, unintelligent and can't be all that educated sufficiently to live in a civilized society. Housing conditions and facilities could be improved, but it's not worth it if they're going to abuse it, read another. I read that all blacks are pains and should be ejected from society. On the whole, most blacks are unemployed, like Rastafarians who go around with big floppy hats, roller skates and stereos, smoking pot and sponging money off the state. Blacks in Britain claim that they are British. I've lived in Britain all my life, and so is my mom. This is a load of junk because white people who live in Mozambique are not considered to be part of the country. Blacks are let go of too much. By this I mean police officers arrest a black person may be called racial prejudice. If all the blacks were deported to Africa or whatever, or wherever they came from, there would be less unemployment and more money for the government to use for us. When I saw them, I thought, God Almighty, said John. This is why I had to make sure that it had to be an anti-racist course. So I could explain to them, not blame them for holding those views, explain to them how it comes about that they all think the way they do. Having acquired this evidence, he didn't take the essay straight to the police college. Instead, he wrote up a syllabus for the course and submitted it to Kilburn's Polytechnic Academic Board. When he got the permission he needed from the board, he took the syllabus to Hendon Police College. They were still not willing to let me take the anti-racist stance because they want to continue being fucking racist. The college also asked him to hand over the racist essays that his course was based on, and arguing that I should give it to them because the students wrote them on the paper that was the property of the police. The property of the police. Why are white people? Why are white people? Hey. Is that better? Is the sound better now? They literally said the essays belong to them because the paper belongs to the police department. John chose not to hand over the essays. Good. Lucky bastard, I want some sushi. Faced with the predicament, he decided to stop teaching at the police college. It was impossible to stay there, he told me. How could I, as a black academic, could be colluding, staying there and doing the multicultural course? So I had to, whether my job was at stake or not, in all consciousness, since I'm black and I take an anti-racist approach, had to leave. There was no way I could stay there. And this is what happens all the time. When black and brown people bring up the actual problem, we are made the problem because we're raising it. Because we're raising questions of the problem. And we are told, oh, you make everything about race. Bitch, y'all did. Y'all started it. And now we live with the consequences. So any white person in here thinking, oh, I'm not the problem, I'm not the problem. The people talking about race is the problem. Yeah, we're going to carry on talking about race because y'all made it that way. You made your bed. Sleep in it. With the goddamn fleas that you brought to our countries. Viewing the college's attitudes as indicative of a wider problem, he turned whistleblower. The press had got wind that what was shaping up to be a scandal Eastern Eye, a documentary TV series broadcast by London Weekend Television, now ITV, aired a 30-minute program focused on what John had found. A senior at the police college responded to the scandal saying, "If I had the slightest suspicion that one of the young cadets had serious deep prejudices rather than shallow ones, then I would not recommend him to be a constable." No, you would. No, you would. I asked John what happened to those trainee police cadets. There were no names, the essays were anonymous. Although I would know who they are, I would not give their names. This is professionalism. It's impossible to know whether or not the essay writers went on to take jobs in the police force or started careers in other professions. What we do know is that John Fernandez uncovered archaic attitudes that influence policing. His anti-racism course was sorely needed, and still is. Because we know that currently police in the West are trained to be afraid of the sun and acorns. Any questions? As would-be black politicians watched what was happening in the communities they came from, they began to push for better black representation. Despite very white leadership, back then Labour Party had become the political home for the country's settled black and brown people. The party didn't have to work particularly hard for black support. It was about necessity rather than the broad range of choice. Yeah, there was no choice. Labour doesn't represent black and brown people. Labour was just better than the other options. Yeah, Taro, absolutely. You cannot deny your whiteness, but you can reject everything that it espouses. Just 20 years earlier, the Conservative MP Peter Griffiths was elected to represent the Midlands constituency of Smethwick, aided by the slogan, "If you want an N-word for a neighbour, vote Labour." Leo Dixon and Mark Wadsworth established the Labour Party's black sections in Vauxhall, South London, in 1983. It was a movement inside the party with the aim of championing black representation in the party. Used in a political sense, black meant everyone who was not white. A general election took place in the same year, and a low turnout of black voters saw the Labour Party admit that they need to do more. A pamphlet from the Vauxhall Labour Party, published in 1984, reveals the thinking behind the formation of these sections and the fiery debate the section sparked among the Labour membership. In the pamphlet, Leo and Mark wrote, "Our constituency covers an inner city area, Brixton, where manifestations of racism in Britain today are all pervasive. It wasn't surprising that the push for black representation in Britain's left-wing party came from South London, an area of the country that, at that point, was in its third decade of settled African and Caribbean migrants. By the time Vauxhall Labour Party's pamphlet was published, the debate was raging in the national press about the legitimacy of the Labour Party's black sections. I will always treat people with love. Unless you hurt somebody I love. In which case, I may be 4'10", but I'm quite badass. To gain ground in the party, as well as access to other black members, the section's organizers went to the party's executive committee to argue their case. In turn, the executive committee took it upon themselves to notify Labour members of all races of a meeting of a black caucus. Leo and Mark were then put in an uncomfortable position of having to argue the case for black representation at some of the party's local branches. They were met with white opposition. Of course they were. When the press got hold of the party debates and the logistics of it all, it was reported as a race row. In correspondence to the Vauxhall branch in July 1984, the Labour Party's then leader, Neil Kinnock, expressed general support towards ending race discrimination in the party, but called the setting up of black sections racially segregationist. Of course, white people just want to interfere with every fucking thing. They won't let us have our own spaces. They won't let us fucking do our own thing. White people have to be involved. It's not racially segregationist for us to have our own safe spaces. Chineka Omaro. The conference of 1984 was a significant one. The membership voted on whether the black sections could formally be established in the party's constitution. Proposing the notion, Bernie Grant, then a councillor of the London's borough of Harrony, said, "Our problem is that blacks are not a priority in the labour and trade union movement at the moment. Black sections are here to ensure that they become a priority. We are concerned because we've been told that our leaders are against black sections." One comrade said that black sections will be turned into ghettos. Writing a report on the conference in Race Today, activist Darkus Howe spoke of an organized efforts to crush the black sections. The argument was a simple one, he wrote. Black sections divide the working class. The motion to formalize the sections didn't pass, but their organizing led to the election of Britain's first black members of parliament in 1987, Diane Abbott, Paul Boateng, and Bernie Grant. Early one September in 1985, police officers broke down the front door of the Grosh family in Brixton, South London. The house they burst into was the home of 37-year-old Cherry Grosh and 5 of her 6 children. The family heard banging and shouting. Cherry left her 11-year-old son, Lee, in the bedroom to find out what was going on. When she went to investigate, she was shot in the chest by a police officer. In a later statement, Cherry said that as she lay on the floor bleeding, police officers continued to shout, asking where her oldest son was. Testimony from her son confirms. Speaking to Channel 4 News in 2014, an older Lee recalled those early hours that changed his life. "I just saw her on the floor, lying. I saw this policeman standing with the gun. He was basically pointing the gun towards her with his legs apart and shouting, 'Where's Michael? Where's Michael?' I was standing up on the bed and shouting, 'What have you done to my mother?' The police turned the gun to me and said, 'Shut up.'" Michael Grosh, 21, he didn't live with Cherry when the raid took place. Cherry was moved to St. Thomas's Hospital that same morning. Local people got hold of the news of Cherry's shooting and crowds began to gather on Brixton streets. To disperse these crowds, police responded by cladding themselves in riot gear, of course. Clashes between the community and police led to 2 days of rioting. There were burglaries, looting, dozens of people sustained injuries. A photojournalist trying to take pictures of the riot was killed. In 1985, Tottenham's Broadwater Farm Estate was heavily policed, but after what happened in Brixton, all police officers were ordered to leave. On 5th October, nearly a week after the riots, Floyd Jarrett was stopped by the police while driving. His tax disc had expired. Because of the minor discrepancy between his car number plate and tax disc, he was arrested for suspected theft of a car. At Tottenham Police Station, off-duty officer Detective Sergeant Randall suggested to his working colleagues that Floyd's house be searched for any other stolen goods. Keys to Floyd's mother's house were taken without his knowledge, which is illegal, by the way. And 4 officers let themselves in. One of those officers was D.C. Randall. They found Floyd's mother, Cynthia, her daughter Patricia, and her small granddaughter. Later that year, Patricia would give evidence to an inquiry about her mother's death, in which she said, "I saw Randall take his left arm, put it around my mother's shoulders, and part of his body pushed her, and she fell with her left arm out, breaking the small table." Randall said he didn't make any contact with her. An inquiry drawing on the coroner's report decided that Randall's push was not deliberate, that it had caused Cynthia Jarrett to fall. Either way, she collapsed. Cynthia was taken to North Middlesex Hospital but died of a heart attack that evening. The same inquest that Patricia gave evidence to delivered a verdict of accidental death. White people always get away with it. The following day, a crowd gathered outside Tottenham police station calling for the accountability for Cynthia's death. According to a report from a community activist organizer, Stafford Scott, D.C. Randall, the same officer who had since been proved to have been present for all pivotal points of the previous day, appeared at the window of the police station. Blaming Randall, protesters started to throw things at him. In the chaos that followed, over 200 police officers were injured. Good. A police officer, P.C. Blakelock, was killed by rioters. Rest in peace. A later inquiry into the events of that night commented, "Let's recall what the evidence of the inquest and magistrate's court revealed. The officers who first stopped Floyd Jarrett made computer checks on his car, apparently for no other reason that he was black. 2, they arrested him and took him into custody on suspicion that his car was stolen, which they had little reasonable basis. And 3, they made a charge against him of assault which was found to be false. The officers' subsequent claim that the Jarrett family shouted at them and became abusive towards them was also false. Cherry Grosh's gunshot wound left her paralyzed from the waist down in the meantime. Her children became her full-time carers. 26 years later, age 63, she died of kidney failure. Her doctors confirmed that her death was directly linked to the gunshot. In 2014, inquest placed the responsibility of her death squarely on the police, finding that they failed to properly plan for the raid on the Grosh's home, including adequately checking exactly who was living there. In the same year, Sir Bernard Hogan Howe of the Metropolitan Police apologized to the family. An apology means nothing. Okay, I'm going to say this once, and once only. Today. If you are white, and you want to apologize to me, don't. I don't want your fucking apology. I don't want you feeling bad for being white. I don't want your guilt. White guilt is poison. White apologies? Fuck that shit. I don't want your apologies. I want you to do something. I have a little bit to go in this chapter. 30 years after the 1985 riots, the cause of the abject neglect of black communities in Britain's big cities was laid bare for all to see. Files from 10 Downing Street, released in the National Archives, revealed that Oliver Luton, then advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, chose not to accept proposals from cabinet members who were keen to implement positive action schemes to the inner cities to refurbish rundown and neglected estates. Oh, sorry, not Luton, Letwin, still a member of Parliament at the time of writing, refused these initiatives. Riots, criminality, and social disintegration are caused solely by the individual characters and attitudes, he wrote to Thatcher, alongside inner-city advisor Hartley Booth. So long as bad moral attitudes remain, all efforts to improve the inner cities will flounder. Basically, saying that black and brown people are not worth the effort. Combing through the literature on clashes between black people and the police, I noticed another, one of perspective. While some people call what happened in Tottenham and Brixton a riot, others called it an uprising, a rebellion of otherwise unheard people. Yes. I think there is truth in both. The extremity of a riot only ever reflects the extremity of the living conditions of said rioters. Language is important, and the term race riot undoubtedly doubles down on the ideas linking blackness and criminality. No, when I hear race riot, I think white hooligans. Black people fighting for their lives. While overlooking that black people were reacting, what black people were reacting against. These conditions don't seem to have changed. When the London riots of August 2011 mirrored almost step by step what happened in Brixton in 85, I wondered how often history would have to repeat itself before we choose to tackle the underlying problems. I recall these histories not to obsessively comb over the past, but simply to know it. Perhaps I'm betraying my ignorance, but until I went actively digging for black British histories, I didn't know them. I had heard that black people in Britain have always had a difficult relationship with police, but I didn't ask why. It made more sense to me once I understood that innocent people died, homes were broken into with scant evidence, that teenagers and young adults were frisked in rituals of humiliation. It made sense to me now how animosity could brew in that environment, and why some insist that the police were the biggest gang on the streets. They still are. ACAB, all day, every day. Fuck the police. And the only body count I care about is how many police. You know what I mean. I don't think my ignorance was an individual thing, that I had to go looking for significant moments in black history, in British black history. It suggests to me that I had been kept ignorant. While the black British story is starved of oxygen, the US struggle against racism is globalized into the story of the struggle against racism that we should look to for inspiration. Fuck no. Eclipsing the black British story so much that we convince ourselves that Britain never had a problem with race. We need to stop lying to ourselves and stop lying to each other. To assume that there was no civil rights movement in the UK is not just untrue, it does a disservice to our history, leaving gaping holes in the story of progress. Black Britain deserves context. Speaking to the Radio Times, David Oyelowo highlighted the lack of historical British films about black people, saying, "We make period dramas in Britain, but there are almost never black people in them. Although we've been on these shores for hundreds of years." I remember taking a historical drama with black figures at its center to a British executive with green light power, and what they said was, if it's not Jane Austen or Dickens, the audience doesn't understand. And I thought, okay, you're stopping people from having a context for a country they live in, and you are marginalizing me. I can't live with that. So I've got to get out. Faced with the collective forgetting, we must fight to remember. I know there's so much more history out there about people of color in Britain, and if you're willing to put that effort to find it. After Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016, we were told reported hate crimes drastically grew in number, and that racism was on the rise in Britain again. But looking at our history, racism does not erupt from nothing. It is embedded in British society. It's the very core of how the state is set up. It's not external. It is the system. And I will stop there for today. Again, my apologies for starting the reading so late. My husband and I were watching Queen Charlotte, which is interesting kind of segue into this. I do want to talk Bridgerton though. Who here has watched Bridgerton? Okay, senseless. ACAB all day, every day. Do you like it? Hi, welcome. I really enjoy Bridgerton. Thank you. I really, really enjoy Bridgerton. This is now, I think, the fourth or fifth time I'm rewatching it. I only started watching it after Queen Charlotte was released. And I binged the whole thing and then waited for season 3. And now I am waiting for season 4. It is one of my happy places. The juxtaposition from that to this. Watch Queen Charlotte. They never explicitly mention racism. And you know that this is Shonda Rhimes. She doesn't shy away from this. And then you have this. The real history of Britain. The real history of blackness and brownness in Britain. Up. The puzzle piece did not do the thing. Come on. It's such a good book. All right, if none of you on Twitch and YouTube have any questions, I will be ending those streams there. You can join me on TikTok if you want to continue the discussion. I'm going to make myself another cup of tea. So yeah, remember, stay dangerous.